It's time to learn about radio. James Clerk Maxwell first theorized radio with his mathematical formula in 1864, which proved wireless waves could travel through space with information. In 1888, Heinrich Rudolf Hertz was able to prove this theory in an experiment. Fast forward about 30 years, and we find the early stages of audio broadcasting and in-home receivers. KDKA in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is commonly credited with receiving the first license, received October 1920. They went on to broadcast live that November's presidential election results in its inaugural show. Radio ownership grew from about 2 out of every 5 homes in 1931 to about 4 out of every 5 homes in 1938. Now it's time to meet the FCC. The Communications Act of 1934 is a United States federal law signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on June 19, 1934. It opens as follows. For the purpose of regulating interstate and foreign commerce in communication by wire and radio, so as to make available, so far as possible, to all the people of the United States a rapid, efficient, nationwide, and worldwide wire and radio communication service with adequate facilities at reasonable charges, for the purpose of national defense and for the purpose of securing a more effective execution of this policy by centralizing authority theretofore granted by law to several agencies and by granting additional authority with respect to interstate and foreign commerce in wire and radio communication, there is hereby created a commission to be known as the Federal Communications Commission, which shall be constituted as hereinafter provided, and which shall execute and enforce the provisions of this act. Basically, the FCC is now in charge of licensing radio stations, among other things. In 1937, 1X-XOJ, the first experimental FM radio station, was granted construction permit by the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. This system was not perfect, but seemed to work fine for about 60 years. In 1996, President Clinton decided to go away with the regulation that had been in place for decades by signing the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Ownership guidelines were thrown out, giving anyone the ability to own as many stations as they wanted, wherever they wanted. Also in 1996, radio consultant Louis Dickey Jr. and media technology entrepreneur Richard Weening decided to acquire and operate radio stations in mid-sized markets where giant Clear Channel, owner of 850 U.S. radio stations, was not operating. Within just 14 years, Cumulus, now its own giant, owned 570 radio stations in 125 markets. That's about 4 radio stations per market they're in. This needs to stop now. Our cable companies are acting in the same fashion, getting bigger, more powerful, and less likely to allow room for the voice of the people to be heard. By giving the voice that belongs to an entire nation to just a few corporations, a certain rhetoric is born and cultivated into the monster we see before us today. Free, uninhibited public speech is becoming much harder to find in our airwaves, and it's just a matter of time before they're completely controlled by a corporation's agenda. Repeal the 1996 Federal Telecommunications Act. Write, call, or email your local politicians today, and make sure it is their priority to act on behalf of the people to get this issue.